I'm Ash Bennington from Real Vision. Today, I'm joined by Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, virtually at South by Southwest. Sergey and I have had many of these conversations in the past, which I've always enjoyed. Today, we're going to be speaking about some incredibly important and popular topics in the digital asset space, Web3, DeFi, and cross-chain interoperability. Sergey, we were talking a little bit off camera. Tell us about DeFi in Chainlink right now. What are you guys doing, and why is it critical to what you're doing at Chainlink?
Sure. So I think it's useful to view our industry in a holistic sense. So I think the thing that's useful for people to get their mind around is really what Web3 is, and then that'll put DeFi, Chainlink, and all that stuff into perspective. So generally speaking, Web3 is a reinvention of how people agree with each other and how they agree with each other through institutions, through platforms, through any number of other systems. Generally speaking, I think what Web3 is really about is reinventing the relationship between people in terms of how they can rely on each other. So the way that people rely on each other and on institutions right now is that they have paper agreements, and those paper agreements are digitized, right? So when you have an agreement with your bank that you use through an app, or when you use a trading venue like Robinhood, or when you use some other web system, you basically have an interface, a web interface, but that web interface is backed by what we call paper guarantees. So these paper guarantees seem like they're sufficiently good, but in reality, history has shown, whether it's from the 2008 financial crisis, whether it's through things like Robinhood, whether it's through things like Evergrande, a big real estate developer that's having problems right now, those paper guarantees, in China, those paper guarantees don't really add up a lot of the time. And this is actually the thing that Web3 solves. So before you can understand DeFi and blockchains and Chainlink and all these things, I think we need to just get to a fundamental base level of what is different about all the applications in the Web3 blockchain DeFi industry. And the primary thing that's different is that they are built in a way that guarantees outcomes. And when I say guarantees outcomes, I don't mean they're guaranteed by a legal framework or a piece of paper somewhere. I mean, they're cryptographically guaranteed. And what cryptographically guaranteed means is that as long as mathematics and physics works in the way that is expected, it's expected to work, which is pretty much, I think, probably the best guarantee any of us are going to get throughout our lives, then the agreement you have will work as expected, right? So this is most simply shown through something called private keys. So private keys are those wallets or those hardware keys that people associate with cryptocurrency. But beyond sometimes being a little bit difficult to use, they actually give you complete deterministic control over the asset they're related to. When you have a login to a bank, you don't really own anything. The bank owns everything, and the bank can decide to give it to you or not to give it to you. And that's pretty much at their discretion. And if they don't give it to you, then you can engage in long procedures to try and get it from them. Or, there's a number of these issues with the stimulus payments and other development payments. And there's all these situations where people basically think they have something, or they have control, or they have a relationship with a counterparty. The problem is that relationship doesn't exist. What exists is a kind of promise that very often isn't honored by the application if it becomes inconvenient, or there's any number of problems. So this is actually what the 2008 financial crisis was. This is what happens when trading venues halt. So that's what Web3 is the alternative to. So what DeFi is, in that lens of cryptographically guaranteed agreement, DeFi is cryptographically guaranteed financial services, financial products. When you hear DeFi, the D is decentralized, and decentralized in our industry means different things to different people. It's actually a very big word that can encompass a lot of concepts. Some people view it as a reliability guarantee that the system will be up and available. Some people view it as a tamper-proof guarantee such that, governments or somebody else can't stop transactions. Other people view it as a transparency guarantee so that you can see what's going on within the application and manage risk. And other people see it as a user control guarantee, such that while you have a private key, you control outcomes, not other people or other systems. And all of this is packed into that word decentralized. And all of that is also packed into the words Web3. So I think the core to understanding anything in our industry is really understanding that our industry is about reinventing the relationship that people have with entire portions of the economy. Because the economy right now doesn't work the way they think it works. And there's a few people that know this. So there are people in banks, and there are people in insurance companies, and people in ad networks, and people in trade finance institutions that actually understand how these things work on the back end. They understand what the risk dynamics are. They understand what it means when you have a contractual agreement with an insurance company. And this is why they're adopting all this technology, because the transition from a paper-based guarantee that's probabilistic, that could at any point be realistically be reneged on for any number of reasons, to a deterministic, cryptographically guaranteed relationship, that is a more than order magnitude improvement. The reason that people don't cry out for this improvement is because in many verticals, once again, people believe they already have a high degree of assurance that their relationship with their peers through a platform or their relationship with institutions is guaranteed. And it isn't guaranteed in the sense that Web3 guarantees it. This is the key concept behind all of this. And DeFi is a use case that brings that concept to life in the financial services sector. And Chainlink is an infrastructure that allows DeFi to provide that concept of a cryptographically guaranteed financial product.
So let me ask you a kind of a devil's advocate question, Sergey. For someone who's living in the United States, who says, okay, Sergey, I agree with you. That all makes sense theoretically. I don't truly own my deposits at the bank. When my company pays me through my local bank, which is probably a national bank, I don't truly own that money. But every time I go to the ATM machine or I pay my rent electronically, it works. Why is it that I need this technology? What is the true advantage to people who feel as though their services right now work pretty well for them?
Sure, absolutely. So there are a few nuances. There's a few nuances there. One of them is that in certain cases where the services work sufficiently well and people are willing to take certain risks, then the value proposition I just described might not be as immediately attractive. That doesn't mean that there aren't other applications that have very, very superior features. So one superior feature that you get when you do better risk management and you create a globally accessible market for assets is high returns. So in DeFi right now on the US dollar, you can get anywhere from 2 to 8%. In your bank account on the US dollar, you will be lucky to get 1%. So this is an additional feature that comes out of these capabilities. So I think the problem here is twofold for this example. One problem is that the really scary things that I described aren't happening yet.
Right.
And the problem with that is that it really doesn't mean that they won't happen. And it doesn't mean that people are protected from them. Basically, managing counterparty risk in a better way is always better. That's just a logical thing. And there are actually cases of this where banks don't allow people to access their deposits, cases where people can't get access to their money. There are more and more cases of this. But all of that aside, the other aspect of this is that this superior form of financial products actually generates better returns. So at the most basic level, if you're not worried about controlling your own assets, if you're not worried about your bank not giving you access to your money, if you're not worried about your bank extracting random fees from you, if you're not worried about the solvency relationship your bank has with its underlying collateral, which is probably backed by the US dollar, which has been massively overprinted, and there's a kind of causal chain there well in place and ready to go. if all of those things don't really concern you because maybe they don't concern you or maybe you don't know about them, it's a big difference in my view. But let's say for whatever reason they don't concern you, would you prefer to get 8% on your USD deposits, or would you prefer to get sub 1%? And then the features of DeFi kind of only get better from there. So it's the features that I'm talking about are the greater than orders of magnitude improvement features, right? So the real question to ask about all of this is, if all web systems were replicated in Web3 systems, right? If Web3 systems achieve the speed, the efficiency, the cost, the usability of all Web2 systems, and Web3 systems also offered you better guarantees, would you ever choose a Web2 system? Or would you always choose the same exact thing, but with better guarantees? Every rational actor would always choose the system with better guarantees. And by the way, having better guarantees, having better risk management, having better transparency, having a global market for liquidity rather than a local or a national market, creates these additional benefits like this very large rate of return on a US dollar in the form of a stable coin. So I think there are these other benefits, which are more of these more immediate tangible features. But what I was talking about previously was the core foundational differences. And those core foundational differences give rise to a number of things that, I tend to think a lot about, and people building these systems at scale tend to think a lot about. But then when you build those things at scale, you actually get other benefits for users, such as a better rate of risk-adjusted return. So I would say that it kind of depends who you are. If you're somebody who's very sensitive to these risks, then you don't really have an alternative but to go towards crypto and DeFi and Web3 cryptographically guaranteed systems. My personal view is that more and more people are going to become sensitive to these guarantees because inflation, the failure of various centralized systems' ability to provide the guarantees that they claim they provide will drive people to look for an alternative. And cryptographically guaranteed versions of things are that alternative, which is what all of this is about. But if you're not in those groups, then you can get much, much higher returns right now by going into the global DeFi market than you can by going into the global financial standard banking system. And so like that is a big deal for some people. Is it a big deal from my point of view? Yes, it is. But it's an outgrowth of those other features. That's how that's possible. And so it's really those core differences that enable that and many other things.
So Sergey, we're having this conversation at South by Southwest today. We typically have these conversations in our own sort of blockchain-based community. For people who are hearing about this for the first time, who are thinking, wow, that actually sounds really cool. Better risk management, higher transparency, greater return, more security, better counterparty risk, all of the things that DeFi Web 3.0 promises. Where are we right now in this adoption process?
I think for DeFi, we're still pretty early. DeFi is still in the low hundreds of millions in terms of the value locked in them. The total value locked in the cryptocurrency format fluctuates between 1.5 and 2.5 trillion. That is very, very large growth from even 2 years ago when we had sub 500 billion numbers, right? So the real progression here has been that people engage in ownership. They engage in ownership of whatever asset, a token, a utility token, an NFT, whatever it is. And then once they have ownership, they want to do things with this, what they own. So DeFi and decentralized insurance and also blockchain gaming are these outgrowths of an ecosystem where people have value, right? They essentially, for lack of a better analogy, they have money to spend, right? They've kind of turned their value into this crypto format. So the crypto formatting of value, I also think is early because the amount of value that can be formatted into the crypto format is in the hundreds of trillions. It's not in the 1.5 to 2.5 trillion. But DeFi is even earlier than that, partly because the on-ramps into DeFi are still being developed and still being managed. I think DeFi is a huge opportunity for people looking to get a return in a safe, transparent, risk-adjusted way. But it isn't. It's something that's gradually becoming more accessible to people that have value in the crypto format. And what I expect to happen is that just like PayPal and other bigger web applications eventually gave people access to having some kind of control or relationship with crypto formatted value in the form of cryptocurrencies to start. Those applications will eventually give those same people access to all of these other services. And those services will come in the form of DeFi and all these other things. So basically what it's really about is a reformatting of value into this new, better, superior format. And then that value wants to be used in applications. And that's what DeFi is. And that's partly what drives some of DeFi, some of blockchain gaming and some of the NFT activity. It's kind of a growing ecosystem of applications and value all interacting with each other.
Yeah. Sergey, one of the things I know you want to talk about is cross-chain interoperability. So if we talk about this space, obviously in the digital asset space, in the blockchain space, still relatively early, very early in DeFi. And I would say within DeFi itself, very, very, very early in the cross-chain space. For people who aren't really familiar with what's happening here, because they're not following it every day the way Sergey is, there recently was a $320 million hack between a bridge called Wormhole between Solana and Ethereum. This is obviously a pretty significant security hole. These are some of the challenges right now associated with so-called cross-chain interoperability. First of all, what does that term mean to you, cross-chain interoperability? And what are you guys doing at Chainlink to work with some of these issues and to try and get some of this stuff sorted out?
Yeah, sure. So cross-chain interoperability for me is the communication between different blockchains, basically. It's not just about token movement for me. It's actually about communication of commands, information, events, and tokens. That's how we view cross-chain interoperability. Many people focus on it as just a token-related activity, because that's where there's some of the initial demand. But we have a higher level idea around messaging. And this higher level idea is, what gave rise to a number of platforms and standards in the early version of the internet, things like TCP/IP, some of the other messaging systems that allowed, different internets to connect. So our approach to cross-chain interoperability is something called CCIP, which it enables token movements. It enables a lot of other things, but mainly it focuses on communications. So if you look at how the internet works, even though you're communicating about credit card numbers, or even if you're communicating about billion-dollar trade transactions, you're still engaging in communications, right? You're communicating messages about the execution of a trade, the transfer of an asset, the credit card number, whatever it is. So the right way to view cross-chain interoperability is not just token movements, it's actually communications. And how do you create secure, verifiable communications that the other side of the communication, the other chain, knows should be executed, such as the locking, unlocking of a token, or the minting or the burning of a token. So communications actually creates a better foundation for token-related activities as well. Generally speaking, this is much closer to the center of the onion layer of things. This is, as you put it, a very, very early problem. In the world of Web3, it's once again getting people to see the value of cryptographically guaranteed applications. Then it's those applications, actually being built. Then there's them being supported by Oracle networks as key infrastructure, which is where Chainlink comes in. And then there's the application of those Oracle networks to cross-chain communication. So the Chainlink networks, of which there are several hundred, at the end of 2021 secured over 75 billion. And that grew from only 7 billion at the end of 2020. So there was very large growth in our ability to basically support DeFi and various applications. And during that growth, none of the value was extracted in an adversarial manner. And that is a track record that basically no other system really of this kind has in our industry. So our goal now is to apply Oracle networks, which is what Chainlink does. It's these computing environments that provide guaranteed, cryptographically guaranteed outcomes on topics other than what blockchains do. These topics range from data to random number generation to automation to, in the case of your question, cross-chain communications, right? So the same system that secured over 75 billion at the end of this past year and is on track to secure significantly more than that based on ongoing integrations is now going to be applied to cross-chain communications. And what this will do is it'll create something called cross-chain smart contracts. So this is it's actually a very logical idea. So if you look at how web systems are built, web systems are a collection of core code, often called services. So there's a number of services that people write within their own core in-house kind of application environments, wherever that may be, AWS or GCP or a collection. Then there's a lot of external services. And realistically, where the blockchain industry right now is that people tend to write applications in one environment. They kind of choose one blockchain. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to allow them to, from that one blockchain, make more advanced applications with data, with randomness, with automation. But now that same capability will actually allow people to build smart contracts that are composed of multiple pieces of code on multiple chains, just like web applications are composed of multiple pieces of code running on multiple clouds. And that's kind of a trivial thing to connect the multiple services. You might write a service on Azure, you might write another service on AWS, and you might write a third service on GCP for whatever reason, right? Maybe GCP has a good BigQuery capability, AWS has a good S3 storage capability, and Azure has some other capability. And you connect that up into your application. The cross-chain communications improvement will allow people to build applications in this way, where they can simply connect multiple contracts on multiple chains together with the existing Oracle network-based data services and other services to make these really advanced cross-chain smart contracts. And I think that's one of the last big kind of infrastructure hurdles so that people can use various blockchain infrastructures for the thing that they're very good at. So if there's like a very high security, high cost infrastructure, you use that for certain things. If there's a very low latency, but not as secure, not as reliable infrastructure, maybe use that for other things. And this will actually allow more and more advanced and basically more and more useful smart contract applications, which will continue that cycle of value interacting with applications and applications giving people more and more reasons to put value in the crypto format. So this is actually the cycle that we hope to accelerate through all the services we provide, so that people have more and more reason to put their value into a crypto format, because there's more and more advanced applications that they can use through that crypto formatted value.
Let me just give a little bit of context out for folks who are listening to us who are not computer scientists, who are not involved in enterprise IT. Some of the points that you just made: GCP is Google Cloud Platform, AWS is Amazon Web Services, Azure is Microsoft's Cloud Services Platform. The idea here is that this is where back-end applications are running on the web for software as a service. You're talking about effectively with Oracle's, which is probably the word that's most associated with Chainlink, basically effectively connecting these different layers in ways that allow Web 2 applications to interact with Web 3 applications. Give us a little bit of a sense of what it is that you're doing right now in terms of your product development roadmap and where we are with enterprise ability to utilize some of these services today to make some of the things that you've just discussed happen.
Yeah, sure. That's another also really complicated question. So there is kind of a continuum of adoption of this technology that depends on whether the person making the application is crypto native. So their application was made only for a blockchain environment, or if, since you mentioned the word enterprises, you already have infrastructure. So the people that use Chainlink right now use it for the various Oracle networks that essentially act as decentralized services. So just like there are web services like Twilio or Stripe or any number of other services that provide essentially an API for web developers to build with, there are hundreds of Chainlink networks, which essentially make hundreds of decentralized services. So this is
let me just say, API is application program interface. These are the standards that programmers can use other existing services to interact with their own applications. This is something that's incredibly important because it allows people, for example, to build applications. A shopping application would be one example, using an existing suite of services. So you can basically concentrate on building the part of the party that's unique to your business, connecting these things back and forth. And now you're discussing how effectively to do this in a Web 3.0 format.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for that context, Ash. You're right. I basically live in this, like, my little Chainlink isometric bubble here with all this stuff, and you're absolutely right about that. So I think that, yeah, the first thing we do for crypto native applications is we replicate the dynamic where they have multiple services that they can use to build advanced applications, which continues that cycle: more crypto value, more applications, more crypto value, that cycle. The enterprise is slightly different because the enterprise has existing infrastructure that holds billions of dollars in value. And so their problem is not exactly the same. Their problem is actually how to get their existing systems to interface with all the different chains that they're going to need to interface with. In the process of launching all these different decentralized services across all of these different chains, we have actually created what's called an abstraction layer. So an abstraction layer is basically a interface through which, well, it's not just an interface, but it's basically an environment or an interface or a framework through which people can interact with multiple other more complicated systems in a simplified way. And this is actually how engineers build a lot of things, is they have multiple abstraction layers going, all the way down to like the low level machine code. And there's just abstraction layer on top of abstraction layer. So what Chainlink also is, in addition to these Oracle networks providing all these services, is this abstraction layer that allows enterprises to utilize all these different chains through one interface, through one framework. And this is what historically has also accelerated development of applications in the web world. Right, so there's a number of frameworks that have accelerated how people have built applications. Some of them have had domain-specific languages attached to them. Some of them, have had just certain other properties as far as simplifying how people interact with more complicated systems. This is where enterprises, I think, really benefit from our work. So if you're a crypto native application, you probably use the services to make your application. If you're an enterprise, you're probably not making smart contracts at this point. You're probably dealing with custody. And custody is a gateway for most enterprises because, once again, in the cycle of adoption here, people of crypto format their value, right? They turn their value into a crypto format. So the first part in the cycle for enterprises is also, how do I interact with any value at all? And that happens through custody solutions. But after they interact with value, they then need to interact with other applications like smart contracts. And for that, they need this abstraction layer, which is what we provide. So that is really how enterprises, I think, benefit from this. And we're already working with many enterprises that we're helping accelerate in their usage of DeFi, in their usage of various applications, so that they can offer the access to DeFi that their user base, in some cases, asks for, and in all likelihood will soon demand. So that's the relationship we have with enterprises. The difference is that they have existing infrastructure that they need to make connected.
Sergey, I know we have dipped into the deep end of the tech pond here a little bit, but I suspect that people who are listening to this are probably really intrigued by this world you're discussing. As we come to the end of this conversation, what do you think comes next for people who have been listening to what you're saying and are really just interested to learn more? What should they be looking at for? What do you think is going to happen next? And where are the next major innovations going to come from in this space?
I think, generally speaking, people that want to get involved in this industry, which I think is part of your question, should find use cases that they're attracted to and that they understand. For example, there are people who are attracted to going to live concerts. And so the use cases that solve ticket fraud are particularly attractive to them.
Right.
People who work in the ad industry want to eliminate advertising fraud, which is a huge problem, which most people probably don't know or care about. So it depends on who you are and what you're interested in. There are so many trust problems and so many issues that are being solved by our industry because it's reinventing all digital state. It's reinventing all contractual relationships across the entire internet, now and the future relationships. That my first advice is to find use cases that you personally understand, that you personally think are important. If DeFi and financial products aren't exciting to you, that's fine. Maybe you're interested in NFTs and irrevocable ownership of art. If you're not interested in that, then maybe you're interested in insurance, or maybe you're interested in eliminating ticket fraud or supply chain fraud or whatever other set of problems. So that's my first advice. My second piece of advice is probably find a community that you want to be a part of. There are a number of these communities that are well made and well run. We have a community. We have hackathons. We have a lot of materials. We have more and more in-person events that we're doing in a lot of different major cities around all of these topics. So you're welcome to join a number of other people that are interested in this there. And there are a number of other events that might be more focused, but our event is just trying to cover all of these kind of more advanced use cases. So my advice is join a community in person or virtually, depending on your comfort level with that. And then the final thing is, I think that this is such a big and booming industry, and it creates so much value across so many other industries that if you work in another industry, you can probably find a way to make that experience applicable in this industry. So if you work in banking, insurance, that's obvious, right? It's obvious that there are companies you can go and work at and apply this to. But realistically, if you find this interesting and you find this attractive, this is going to be, and already is in many cases, the reinvention of how value is secured, transacted, made automated. It's just how the world is going to work. And that type of shift comes basically once a generation. The previous shift like this was basically the internet. And this is the next shift, right? Built on top of the internet, just like the internet was built on top of a lot of other technology, realistically. So, once you learn about a use case you're interested in, and once you find a community that helps you get educated and that you like being a part of, then my advice is to consider doing something in this industry, whether it's starting a company, joining an organization. This industry covers everything. It really does. You can give me sports. It's relevant to sports. Something else is relevant to something else. It's relevant to things you might not even think it's relevant to, once you understand what it actually does. So my third step would be to consider joining this industry if you think this stuff is important. If you don't think this stuff is important, that's totally fine. I have a feeling that inflation and some of the solvency issues that are going to be coming from global market correction, when the global market correction comes, this is where you should go. This is the place that's going to have the answer to what the alternative is to that. So if you're not sold yet, then just keep it in mind for when that happens, and come back then. But if you get it now, then I would do those three things.
Sergey, that's not just a bullish view, it's a pervasive one. It sounds like coming to an industry near you soon.
Yes, absolutely.
Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
My pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everyone.